Hey guys, welcome back to White Cheeto Gaming, where you can find all of your basic guides on Total War games. If you are interested in this content and want to keep up to date with future guides, hit that subscribe button. Today we'll be looking at the unit roster of the Greenskins. The Greenskins actually have quite a diverse unit roster, which is not really lacking in any one area. There are many kinds of fairly cheap and expendable units, as well as heavy infantry, cav, and monstrous units. Their main strength lies in their massive unit sizes, which allows them to easily overwhelm their enemies on the battlefield. They primarily are offensive based, meaning they will hit hard and fast. Timestamps can be found in the description below if you would like to skip to any portion of the video. First up are the goblins. These will be your expendable frontline unit. They will be used to hold the front lines and protect your flanks from cavalry charges. They will hold decently well. Just be aware that they have bad leadership and will quickly rout if they take too big of a charge. Night Goblins. These are a solid mid-tier unit that offers some variety to the roster. They can be used as flankers with their vanguard deployment and stock. They have poison attacks, so they will be able to reduce their foes down to their level in terms of combat stats. They lack armor and armor piercing, so be sure to avoid sending them in against heavily armored units. Orc Boys are the standard infantry of the Greenskins faction. They deal slightly more damage compared to other factions' standard infantry. They have low armor, but do have a shield. These guys will mostly be used for overwhelming the enemy front lines. Your goblins will engage the enemy front lines, while the orc boys start to surround the enemy from the flanks, quickly overwhelming them and collapsing the flanks of their front lines. Nasty Skulkers. This is a strong armor-piercing unit for the Greenskins. They are also useful in slowing down the enemy using their smoke bomb ability. This unit is almost a necessity to bring when fighting the dwarves, as the dwarves do have quite a few units that are heavily armored. Use these guys for flanking the front lines and prioritize flanking the armored units first. Night Goblin Fanatics. These bring an extremely strong ability to the battlefield. It's called Spinning Loons. This ability can be used to completely decimate an entire unit if used properly. You want to line up your goblin spears in a straight line formation. When the enemy engages your front line, you would use the Spinning Loon's ability straight down their line of infantry. This maximizes the amount of damage the ability does. Units in tight formations like dwarves and high elves will take even more damage due to their clustered formations. The Savage Orc units function similarly to the Orc Boy units, although they are much more offensive focused. They sacrifice armor and shields for a 25% physical resistance and much higher melee stats and damage. They will be utilized in the same way as the Orc Boys, completely surrounding the enemy front lines as your Goblin Spears hold the line. Orc Biggins are similar to the Orc Boys with bigger emphasis on damage. They lose a shield and gain some armor, bonus versus large stats, and better melee stats. In the campaign, if you are able to afford it, you can actually replace your entire front line with these as long as you aren't facing a faction that is very ranged focused. Otherwise, you'll want to just mix them in with your front lines or keep them in reserves to counter big cavalry charges. The Savage Orc Biggins are a high damage dealing unit. They have high melee stats that is bolstered by Frenzy. They have a small bonus versus large, which helps ward off large units. They also have decent armor piercing, which makes them a good option to bring against the dwarves. Their weakness is in their poor defensive melee stats and lack of shielding, meaning they are very vulnerable to missile fire, so be sure to protect them from that. Black Orcs are one of the strongest melee units in the game. They are well armored, have armor piercing, and are immune to psychology. In the mid-game, you'll want to bring 2 or 3 of these in your armies, but once you can afford it, you'll want to bring 5 to 6 of them, possibly even replacing your frontline units with them. Goblin Archers are good in the early game when money is a problem. These are best used to support your frontline engagements against unarmored infantry, or you can use them to fire into the enemy missile infantry. Night Goblin Archers. The one thing that sets them apart from the regular ones is the use of poison arrows. This makes them an excellent support unit for your front lines. The poison arrows will reduce their target's combat effectiveness, so make sure to fire them into the enemy front lines rather than firing them into the enemy missile infantry. The Orc Arrow Boys are a very large missile unit, meaning their damage can add up very quickly. They have decent armor piercing damage on their missiles, meaning they can be effective against more armored factions like the dwarves. So make sure to prioritize firing into the more armored units on the battlefield. They also have decent melee stats, meaning they can defend themselves quite easily against many cavalry or flanking units. The Savage Orc Arrow Boys. These are similar to the regular Orc Arrow Boys. They have the same ranged values, but higher melee stats and lower defensive stats, and also no armor. It may be the safer pick to bring the Orc Arrow Boys instead. However, if you are playing the legendary Lord Azag, you can only recruit these until you get access to the regular Orc Arrow Boys later. The Night Goblin Archer Fanatics are exactly the same as the regular ones, except they have access to their ability Spinning Loons. Make sure to support your frontline engagements with their poison arrows and fire the Spinning Loons ability straight down the enemy front lines for maximum damage. Goblin Wolf Riders are a cheap unit, perfect for flanking in the early game, chasing down ranged infantry, or cyclocharging the backs of the enemy frontline engagements are their main uses. The Forest Goblin Spider Riders are incredibly fast. If caught by other cavalry, they can put up a fight due to their poison attacks and decent melee stats. They are also shielded and have Vanguard deployment, allowing them to flank from unexpected locations. You should prioritize cyclocharging the front line's backs to fully utilize their poison attacks. Night Goblin Squig Hoppers are a fast anti-infantry cav. They are also fun to watch when they charge units. They have Vanguard deployment, which allows them to easily have great positioning for flanking opportunities. Typically these guys are used to take out the enemy missile infantry first because they are so fast and have anti-infantry bonuses. Once the missile infantry are out of the way, they can join the rest of your cav in cyclocharging the enemy front line's backs. The Orc Boar Boys are the more armored cav. They are also shielded and have great armor piercing and anti-infantry values. These are not as fast as the previous cav units, therefore they should be used more for rear charging the enemy front lines. Cyclocharging is the ideal tactic, but they are quite slow, making it a tedious task. These are the Savage Orc versions of the Orc Boar Boys, although they have much less armor and no shields. So these are much more vulnerable to missile fire. They are best used for charging into infantry when doing the hammer and anvil tactics. Also be sure to be cyclocharging them instead of leaving them in prolonged combat. Orc Boar Boy Biggins are the heavy cav anti-cavalry of the Greenskins. They are decent at their roles, they don't have great melee stats, they also have no shields, they're low speed, and they don't have the best armor. Their main strength lies in their charge bonus, armor piercing damage, and bonus versus large. This makes them great at charging into large armored targets, although they don't excel in prolonged combat, so be sure to charge them in, let them fight for a few seconds, and then pull them out to set up for another charge. These chariots are strong and heavy hitting. It sacrifices speed for damage. These have great anti-infantry bonuses, as well as good armor piercing damage. These will be used for cyclocharging into the backs of your enemy front lines. Make sure to prioritize hitting the heavily armored infantry, and also do not engage them with any anti-large units if they will have no support from your front lines. The Savage Orc Boar Boy Biggins are similar to the regular Orc Boar Boy Biggins with even less melee defense. They don't have as much anti-large bonuses as the standard Biggins cav, so this makes them more of a generalist unit. Overall, it would be better to bring the standard Boar Boy Biggins for the anti-infantry uses and bring the Savage Orc versions when facing fear/terror causing units. The Goblin Wolf Rider archers are great for harassing the enemy. They are extremely fast, making them almost impossible to catch. Use these guys to harass the enemy on their approach to you, and then slowly bring them around behind their front lines to fire into their backs. They have almost no armor piercing damage, so try to not focus the more heavily armored units. Forest Goblin Spider Rider archers. These excel at softening up a unit for the rest of your infantry to easily deal with. They have poison arrows, which reduces enemy combat effectiveness. Their high mobility allows them to be able to move anywhere on the battlefield very quickly. They lack armor piercing and melee defense, so avoid firing into heavily armored units and never let them engage in melee combat until they have run out of ammunition. The Goblin Wolf Chariots are extremely fast. It has a decently high model count for a chariot unit, meaning they will excel at disrupting the enemy lines, and this is further amplified through their ranged attacks. Make sure to turn on melee mode for these guys so you can charge in and out of the enemy infantry. If a unit is alone, charge straight through them and run away, or you can just charge them straight into the backs of the enemy front lines engagements, just don't leave them in prolonged combat. The Squig Herd. These aren't the best Monstrous cav, but they are a cheap armor piercing option in the early game. They are great for utilizing in your hammer and anvil tactics. You can also use them to chase down missile infantry, but they aren't as fast as the other cav you have access to. They do have low melee defense, so they would take quite a bit of damage when engaged in any type of combat. The trolls are an effective unit for wreaking havoc on the frontline engagements. Allow your front lines to engage and then send in the trolls. They have good armor piercing damage, which means you should prioritize sending them in against the more armored units on the front lines. They are even more useful for breaking down gates during siege battles. The river trolls are basically a more defensive version of the trolls. Their overwhelming odor is a strong debuff that reduces enemy melee attacks, which makes them a good anchor piece for your front line. Their regeneration on top of the debuff makes them harder to kill than the normal trolls. Their weakness is their low armor piercing damage and low leadership, so be sure to have good support units with them on the front lines. The stone trolls have a slight boost to armor piercing damage as well as some magic and missile resistance. This allows players to bring tankier and more resistant trolls at a higher cost. Once you get access to river trolls and stone trolls, it is better to take them over the regular trolls. Like both troll units, mix them in with your frontline engagements and keep them away from anti-large infantry. Giants are extremely strong damage dealers, however they have two significant weaknesses: low armor and low speed. Their huge hitbox makes them easy targets for missile infantry and artillery. You should allow your front lines to engage before sending him in. Send him into engagements where he is fighting armored units or any type of elite units. Use your light cav to stop any potential missile fire into the giant. They are also fear and terror causing, meaning they will provide great value to your frontline engagement. The Arachnarok Spider is a massive terror causing monster. It is a great anchor unit for your low leadership infantry like the Goblin Spears. Bringing one or two of these would be a good idea. The Spider actually has good anti-large bonuses and armor piercing damage, although they do not excel at fighting armored monstrous units unless you send them in with some other anti-large support with them. They also have poison missiles firing off of their backs, which is quite useful. This unit should be wary of spear and halberd units. Having a large hitbox also means it is vulnerable to focus fire. Just be sure to use your light cav to take care of the enemy backlines. The Rogue Idol is a massive rock monster that is an absolute tank and should be used to draw in the enemies to his location. He has insane armor and health, allowing him to soak up a lot of damage. Best tactic to use him for is to send him in first to allow the enemy to clump up around him. Then you can bombard his location with artillery and missiles, or you can just completely surround the enemy while they focus on him. Just make sure to not send him in alone against elite anti-large armor-piercing infantry. He is also quite useful for sieges, as you can send him into the gates first to tank all of the tower shots, so your infantry takes less damage on their approach. The Snotling Pump Wagon is a very effective anti-infantry chariot for its cost. It is difficult to pin down and can do lots of damage if allowed to run over the frontline units. It is exceptional for its attacks on enemy frontline's rears. They are also fairly decent at making holes through stagnant front lines. These will mainly be used for cycle charging and not to be left in prolonged combat. Goblin Rock Lobbers are your standard artillery piece for the Greenskins. It has good armor piercing values. Place them behind your front lines and protect them from cavalry charges. Make sure to prioritize targeting heavily armored infantry first. The Flappas are the faster version with a significantly higher charge bonus. Keep them away from anti-large infantry and allow them to charge straight through standard infantry lines. They also have armor sundering, allowing them to reduce the armor of units they attack. The Spiky Rollers are the elite and heavy-hitting version of the pump wagons. They do heavy armor piercing damage and also armor sundering damage at double the cost. If you can afford it, always take these over the other two pump wagon versions. The Doom Diver Catapults are a devastating armor piercing artillery. Their projectiles are similar to the Hail Cannon to where they are guided missiles. They almost never miss their targets. These will be focusing more on the heavily armored infantry first. Once the front lines engage, then you can just fire them into the enemy backline. Okay, so now we're going to look at just a early game composition. So we're going to have 4 Goblin Spears as our front line, and then 1 Goblin Spear in the reserve to protect from any cavalry flanks, just in case. We have 2 Orc Boys on each sides of the front lines. These will be used to either counteract any flanking units, or they can just easily move around to surround the enemy front lines. Goblin Archers will be placed in the center. These will be used to fire into the enemy missile infantry or just routing units in general. We have 2 Nasty Skulkers over here and 2 more Nasty Skulkers over here, along with 2 light cav units. Goblin Forest Forest Goblin Spider Riders and Goblin Wolf Riders. Goblin Wolf Riders will be used to chase down the enemy missile infantry, while the Forest Goblin Spider Riders will be used to charge into the backs of the enemy frontline engagements. The Nasty Skulkers will also be used to flank the enemy front lines as well. Typically, what's going to happen in most battles is you're just going to completely overwhelm the enemy with your just sheer numbers. Okay, so now we're going to look at a late game composition. We have 2 Doomdiver catapults along with 5 orc biggins. 3 of them are the front line, 2 of them on the flanks, 2 black orcs on the flanks as well, right directly behind them. I have them placed behind them because they have organ guns and flame cannons. I want them to fire at the biggins first, if possible, so that way the black orcs don't take as much damage from the artillery. 3 Night Goblin Archer Fanatics in the center. Grimgore is in the center as well. We have some River Trolls here. We'll use them to sort of debuff the frontline engagements. A Giant here as well. He's just brought because this is the Dwarves, so we'll need as much armor piercing as we can get. We have some Orc Boar Boy Biggins. They don't generate too much value against the Dwarves because Dwarves don't typically have large units. And we also have some Forest Goblin Spider Riders and Night Goblin Squig Hoppers. And so we're going to go ahead and start this battle. And Doomdiver catapults actually have a fairly large range, so they're able to fire from decently far, especially into dwarves. And we're just going to fire into their more elite units, which would be the hammerers. First, we're going to move up our front line here. And just go ahead and fast forward here a little bit. And here we go with the engagement. So the Orc Biggins have been sent in. These are the main frontline unit we have. You can see we have some hammerers here coming after the cav we have, but these will easily be able to outrun them. And you can see these hammerers have taken quite a bit of damage from the Doomdiver catapults already, and the battle hasn't even started. And see, the flame cannons are firing into our Orc Biggins, which is good, but these are firing into the Black Orcs. Or well, actually, no, they are not. They're firing into the Orc Biggins as well. And so fire has been begun from the Fanatics. We're firing into these engagements to sort of help out our front line, but these Orc Biggins took too much damage from the flame cannons. We're sending some Biggins after the flame cannons, but they've already routed. River Trolls are coming in to support them, but they've already routed, which is not good for them because they need to be supported. We have our Rogue Idol directly in the center with the Giant, sort of trying to create a pocket of strength in the center of the frontline engagement, just so that way we have somewhere to fall back onto. We have Squig Hoppers coming into the range units to disrupt them, stop them from firing, and Orc Biggins just came into these flame cannons and completely routed them almost immediately. We have some flame cannons over here, or Iron Drakes. We need to take those out very quickly because they do quite a bit of damage to armored units, and we're bringing in our Black Orcs from reserves straight into the center to help create that pocket of strength. Looks like our Black Orcs have engaged with the front line with the River Trolls and Grimgore, so it's good. Our Forest Goblin Spider Riders have been engaged with the organ guns. We need to disrupt this artillery as much as we can. Our Night Goblins are still supporting the frontline battles, debuffing them with their poison attacks. We do have some guys that have rallied. I have not noticed them though. And so you can see our Doomdiver catapults are still firing. They volleyed into some routing units, so this was kind of a waste. And our Squig Hoppers have gotten into the Iron Drakes, which is very good because once these guys are shut, these guys need to get shut down very quickly because they will completely decimate your units with just one volley. Looks like we're getting one organ gun out of the fight. We also did pull the 4 spiders sort of onto the flame cannons, so it did stop them from firing as well. And you can see our pocket of strength in the center here with the Rogue Idol, Black Orcs, Giant, and Grimgore. So we're sort of anchored down with this center engagement. Looks like these Ironbreakers are coming to support Thorgrim, but we should be sending our units to help them out as well soon. And these Black Orcs are fighting to the death here against the Hammerers. Pretty much just a fight to the death with these 2 units. We see these 4 spiders just cleaning up the artillery pieces. And you can see these Iron Drakes did get a volley into the Squig Hoppers, which did quite a bit of damage to them. They're going to run straight into them again to finish the routing. Our Orc Warboy Biggins have been brought back into the fight to sort of just make sure the archers don't come back into play. We'll bring these guys in to take out the rest of the Bugman Rangers. Rogue Idol is standing idle. He does need to be brought in to this engagement, but pretty much the battle is won now, with all of their units routing. So that about wraps it up for our Greenskins unit roster guide. Hope you found it useful for your Greenskins campaign. If you enjoyed this content here, make sure you drop a like. Also, hit that subscribe button to keep up to date on any guides I release in the future.